All right, what's up everybody? I was not going to make a disassembly video on this lens because there are a couple of them out there on YouTube that are pretty decent already. So I got this lens, I'd never serviced it before. I took it all apart, got it all back together. And unfortunately the grease that I generally use, the Liquid Moly LM47, just a little too tight on this focus helicoid, which does happen from time to time. Some lenses are tighter, some lenses are looser. But when that does happen, you might want to go back in there and fix that by using a lighter grease. So I've got some Japan Hobby Tool number 10 grease that I like when I need to use that. So I figure if I have to get back in here to get it all re-greased so I can go ahead and sell this lens, I got it for super cheap. And it has a small mark on the rear element. So I'm going to just make sure it's all as good as it can possibly be. Super clean otherwise, but before I put it out into the world of potential buyers out there. So figured since I'm going to be back in there doing that, I'll do a quick disassembly video, more so to talk about the grease and the tools that are used in removing, disassembling vintage lenses. So we'll have a spanner wrench from Newer. This is 20 bucks. I just bought it. I used to have a much nicer one, but this one is for 20 bucks is fantastic. Amazon. Japan Hobby Tool vacuum pads, or whatever they're called. We use this strictly to, I have only ever used it for nameplates, but some people use it for other things in there. There's different designs. They all work the same. Get whichever you want. I'm going to need a JIS screwdriver. This particular one is my favorite one from CLA'd Lens. It is fantastic, and it was free with one of their conversion kits, so that's pretty cool. Love it. You're going to need a flathead screwdriver and a couple other little things, blower, of course. This is Goof Off. It is acetone. We are going to be, I'm not, because I did it the last time I was in this lens, but there's a lot of contact cement in the retaining rings that you'll probably need to use something to break down to unscrew that first retaining ring that we get to when we get to it. So this is, again, Goof Off. It's mostly acetone. It's small. That's why I like it. We travel. I need things small. Lastly, unlikely that you'll need a soldering iron, but if there are any screws within this lens that are not budging with normal force, I suggest you use a small soldering iron to heat them up a little bit. Again, same thing, contact cement. This lens had so much contact cement in it, or whatever they're using, that it was crazy. I've since put a very small amount back in the places needed, but yeah. So let's dive into here. If you guys have any questions about any of this, feel free to reach out to me. Anyway, you'll see that I have my paper towels down. I generally always work on some sort of paper towels or cloth. That way, if a small bearing or spring pops out of something, it will hit the paper towels and not, hopefully, bounce. I also work as organized as possible. I start with the front of the lens and I put it in one line. Then I move to the rear of the lens and put it in another line. And then when I go back to put it back together, that's what you just follow the order backwards. Also, I have a flashlight and my cell phone to take pictures of pieces of the helicoid within the lens. There are going to be specific positions that you need to know to put them back in, or the lens will not focus correctly. So let's get into it. Take the lens cap off, and the first step is going to be getting this nameplate off. Your nameplate is screwed into, generally on these FD lenses, a piece that's literally all it does is hold the nameplate and filters. Unlike other FD lenses, once you get this little nameplate off, you are, instead of dealing with the focusing ring, you are going to be dealing with the front lens group if you want to. So there are, excuse me, I just put these in, so I forgot to tighten that one all the way up. All right, so in the front of this lens, there are three rings, three retaining rings. The inner ring is going to hold just this front piece of glass in. This front group is all together, but if you're looking just to take the front element, just the front element off for whatever reason, that middle ring will get you into that. The inner ring will get you into that. The middle ring will remove this whole front piece off the lens, including the filter holder. Or if you're just trying to remove the filter holder, that gold ring in there will do that. But for our needs today, we are just going to be removing the entire front block all at once and not have to deal with all the little parts. I will take just a second to go over the front part again in a moment. But this is also, if this is too tight and normal force is not opening it, if you're slipping off the ring with your spanner wrench, you're going to need to put some acetone into this area and allow it to get down into the parts here. Because when I did this the first time, I had to use it, and I just put the tip right in between the black and the gold, and I was taking the whole thing apart anyway to clean every single little piece, so it wasn't super important that I didn't get it all over. However, that's all I did was put it right in between the middle and the other ring, and then I just went like this. Waited 10 minutes, came back, did it again, waited 10 minutes, came back, tried it, and it popped right open. So anyway, if it's normal, which hopefully this one should be, force, it should just come right out. And there we go. The thread on this piece is very long. I was surprised at how many times I had to spin this to get it to come apart the first time I did it. Which is just important to note. If you think you're done and it's not coming out, just keep on spinning. So I spun that a lot, so we'll check, and there we go. All right, so this is your front element group. As you can see, that's your filter ring. If you want to take this off, you can with that gold ring. If not, I'm not going to, but you can do that if you want. So there we go. I'm going to set that right there. Next, we're going to need our JIS screwdriver. We're going to take off the focusing ring. There are 3 screws on the outside. They generally have little washers on them that you have to be careful about. Sometimes they pop and fly off. So I just take these 3 screws off on the outer edge. And now I can remove my focusing ring. So this gets you a fair bit into the lens. There's your focus stopper right there. There's your aperture assembly right there. Yeah, so next I'm going to take out the aperture assembly. Just because I'm right here and it's pretty easy to do so. Again, there's 3 screws on the outside parts of the piece, of the inside here. The longer screws right there, 1, 2, 3, and then it, as you saw, just closed. It's under pressure to keep it open. There's a spring in there. So we're going to just pick these little screws up, put them over here in a little pile, and then flip this upside down, give it a shake, and there's your aperture. Okay. At this point, I mean, honestly, we could take out the remaining middle part of this lens. This lens is a pretty cool design. If we take off this little screw and we take off this retaining ring here, this middle gold piece, this whole thing will just come out of the rear. However, I'm going to be taking some things apart so I can take pictures of the helicoid, and I'm going to do this in an order that allows me to access the back, just so for my mental part, you can do it either direction you want. I forget the name of the channel that has the video that I referenced initially. I believe maybe Camera One. Decent enough video, you should be able to get everything from there if something that I'm saying is not making sense. But on these FD lenses, to remove the rear mount, you find this red dot on the outside, and right on the inside there's a little metal piece that's kind of holding that into place, and when you push it, now you can move that silver. And there's these 3 dots that you can use to locate black, generally Phillips head screws, to get the mount off. At this point, I do like to hold the mount on with my fingers. This particular mount doesn't generally have a problem with flying out, but better be safe than sorry. So I'll take 1, 2, and then the third black screw out along the edges. And again, I'm holding the mount on. I'm going to unscrew that. And what I should have done before I started unscrewing these screws is move the aperture to f16 or as closed as possible. And that's going to prevent slapback. Sorry, that's going to prevent some slapback from happening. So we're just going to move the aperture to f16. That way when you take the mount off, it's nice and easy, comes right off. If you don't do it that way, there are a couple little pieces that might get stuck, and I would suggest just putting it back together and or not pulling on it to remove it. Just to put it all back together and go through that disassembly process again. Yeah. Okay, so at this point, again, I'm doing some things that you might not need to particularly for your issue, but for me, I need to remove the helicoid pieces to get the grease in, which means there is a need for me to take off the aperture ring. On the rear, under the mount, there are going to be 2 screws holding on mine. It's this little brass piece of metal right here. It might not be that same color on yours, but it's the same. Should be the same design. And when you remove that little piece that's holding your aperture ring on, you can take your aperture ring off. Now be careful in doing so. There are 2 ball bearings somewhere under here. If you can see these little lines, that's where the ball bearings are clicking into. There are 2 ball bearings that are spring loaded under here. So if you remove this too quickly, it could potentially shoot a little ball bearing out. So I try to cup the whole thing while removing this. And go real slow so I can prevent anything crazy from happening. And there's the ball bearings right there. This isn't a full disassembly for me because I'm only getting what I need to get the helicoid out, but there are 2 springs in these holes that are generally pretty gross. So if you're CLA'ing it, remove those screws and clean them. All right, so it's pretty well disassembled at this point. I'm going to take the focus stopper off. Now I'm going to, on this part for me, it's not super imperative to take a picture, but if you're not used to doing this, I would strongly advise you take a picture of where your focus stopper is in relation to these little holes and also at your different focus points. So from your close focus to your infinity. And kind of know how much distance is there, because again, when you're going to put this back together, you're going to want that information. So, okay, I'm going to come back in here. I'm going to put this in the front side removal line, not the rear. Next stop is we're going to take this little tiny little flathead screwdriver out. Or excuse me, flathead screw out. It's tiny, and I'm going to put it right next to the focus stopper. And what that's going to allow us to do is to remove this retaining ring here. Right in here, there's going to be a ring that we'll need to remove. This glass element is back there though, so I just use my vacuum pad to set it on at this point. I'm going to flip my tips around so the cut is on the outside now. Will let us easier access to this little guy, and just right in there, give it a nice little push, and should be good to go. I'll just use this from here on out to get this off. And when we take this retaining ring off, this whole group now comes out. So we're going to set that right there. And this is our helicoid. There are moving pieces. This, as you spin this, the middle part doesn't move because these little, I don't know how much you guys can see, but this little 2 prongs here hold that piece in. And there are actually 3 pieces here. So this piece, and this piece, and this piece, and they all have to go in, I mean, pretty perfectly. So what I'm going to do for this round, all right, once I got to this helicoid part, my explanation got all sorts of crazy. So to keep this simple, you need to take a lot of pictures at this point. Once you get here, there are 3 pieces here that all have to line up and be exactly perfect when you're going to put it back together, or it's not going to work. So what I recommend doing is spinning this gold ring all the way in to the infinity side, if you know what you're doing. So all the way in and seeing where these are. It's extraordinarily important that you do this, or again, this is not going to go back together correctly. So you need to take that picture, and you need to mark where your little posts are. I've got one mark next to these 2, next to this post that has 2 prongs on it. It's essentially the same thing as this post, but it doesn't, it's not solid. It's cut in the middle, so there's 2 prongs. I don't know how well you can see this, but as you spin this gold ring, this is moving up, the black inside piece here is moving up and down. At a certain point, those prongs come out of their little holders and it releases. And if you don't get all of this and all the screw parts in back perfectly, again, it's not going to work. So record everything you possibly can while you're taking this gold piece off. Take pictures. Pay attention to at what point in time this disconnects from that little prong deal, and it starts spinning. At a certain point, it's going to start spinning. Okay, you see, boom, right there. Now it's spinning, and if you're paying attention, now it's not. So pay attention to all those points. Take all those pictures. At some point, this gold piece is going to come out. These are 2 separate pieces, and at which point this black piece on the inside, you can screw that black piece out. Be careful, take a lot of pictures. This is the most difficult part. If I didn't have to regrease this, I would definitely not be taking this apart. I recommend you do the same. So anyway, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, comment below.